Hey, welcome to tonight's mini lesson on rounding decimals, flipped classroom, all about rounding decimals. This is something you should already know, and if not, well, let me be the first one to welcome you to the world of rounding. We will do rounding. You will be rounding a lot in your real life, and especially in class. But let's go ahead and look at the steps, how to round. Step one, underline the place we are rounding to. So, for example, look at down here, 2.083. If I ask you to round this number to the nearest tenths place, we need to underline the digit that is in the tenths location, which right after the decimal, to the right of it, the first digit to the right of the decimal, is the tenths spot. We want to always underline the place we are rounding to. Okay, that's step one. Always underline the place value that you are going to round to. Then we draw a hook and arrow to the indicator digit that is in the place directly to the right side of our underlying place value. So in this case, I'm going to draw a little hook and arrow to the 8, which is my indicator because that's the hundredths place value. And the tenths relies on the digit that's in the hundredths spot, which happens to be an 8. And then you have a choice here. I'm on step 3 now. If the indicator is a 5 or higher, you bump it up, meaning you cross off the underlying digit and you bump it to the very next digit. So 0, after 0 comes a 1, so I'm going to call that a 1. If the indicator happened to be a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, I would have left the 0 alone and not bumped it up. I would just leave it alone. Once the indicator tells you what to do with your underlying digit, and your two choices every time are either leave it alone or, in this example, bump it up. I'm on step 4 now. All the other numbers to the right of the underlying digit become zeros. So this becomes a 0, this becomes a 0. And if we're dealing with decimals, which in this chapter we are, if you're in decimal land, anything to the right of the decimal, we cut it off at the underlying place value. Meaning, if we're rounding it to the tenths, I want that tenths digit to be my very last digit. So my actual final correct answer is simply 2.1. That is 2.083 rounded to the nearest tenths. Now you might say, can I just put 2.100? Does that matter? When you are rounding, it actually does matter. This is incorrect. The values are exactly the same, but we're not talking about strictly value here. We're talking about rounding it. So when you round it, you must cut it off in decimal land at the place you're rounding it to. Let's look at another example. 74 and 864 thousandths, or 74.864. And what I would like for you to do is watch this example of us rounding it to the nearest. Let's round this one to the nearest hundredths location. And the nearest hundredths, I want to underline the digit that is in the hundredths spot, which in this case is my 6. You have to know place value in order to round. So I underline the 6, and I will always draw a little hook and arrow to the right, to the digit to the right. And I'm looking at the 4, which is in the thousandths place. And that 4 tells me to leave the 6 alone. Remember, if it's a 5 or higher, I'm bumping it up. If it's a 0 through a 4, I'm leaving it alone. I'm not touching it. If it's a 4, I leave the 6 alone, but still I'm on step 4. Everything to the right of that underlying digit becomes a 0, and I'm going to cut it off because I'm in decimal land, and I rewrite my final answer. Always rewrite your final answer, 74 and 86 hundredths, or 74.86. We're going to look at 2 more examples, rounding to the nearest tenths place in these examples. So real fast, I want you to kind of pause it here and practice on your own, but push play when you're ready to see the results. Okay, hopefully you've already done A and B by yourself, and I'm going to round to the nearest tenths place. I underline the 4 because that's in the tenths place. Hook an arrow to the 1 because that's in the hundredths place. The 1 tells me to leave the 4 alone. Now, last step, these become zeros, and since I'm in decimal land, I cut it off right there and rewrite my final answer, 317 and 4/10, final answer. I'm going to round B now to the nearest tenths place. Again, underline the digit that's in the tenths place, hook an arrow to the digit that's in the hundredths place, or to the right of it. The 9 tells me to bump the 3 up, it becomes a 4. Everything to the right becomes zeros. I cut it off at the tenths place, and I rewrite my final answer, 6,504 tenths. Two more examples. This time I want to round them to the nearest hundredths place. A, I'm going to find the hundredths digit, the digit that's in the hundredths location, 2 places to the right of the decimal, the 6. Draw a hook and arrow, always to the digit to the right. It's a 4. 4 tells me to leave the 6 alone. These become zeros, decimals. I cut them off right there. Rewrite my final answer, 41.36. Letter B. Again, find the hundredths location. The digit in the hundredths place happens to be the 4 this time. Hook an arrow to the indicator. The indicator tells me it's an 8. Bump it up. 4 becomes a 5. 8 becomes a 0. And I cut it off right there. And I rewrite everything I already have. 2,317 and 85 hundredths. Go ahead now. I want you to take these 2 examples, numbers 1 and 2. I want you to practice and bring them with you on a sheet of notebook paper to class tomorrow. But I want you to round each of these. You got to do one at a time. Round them to the tenths, and then round it to the hundredths, and then rewrite the original problem, round it to the thousandths, and then round it to the nearest whole number, also known as the ones place. So do that. So you should take number 1 and round it 4 different times to 4 different locations, and write down your 4 different results. And then take number 2 and round this number 4 different times. I will see you in class tomorrow. Practice even more problems than just this, and we'll talk about it in class. See you then.